Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for October 14th, 2022. Well, yesterday was certainly a good day for those who are trying to bring sanity back to the world. It featured an incredibly powerful intervention in New York City where two young members of the LaRouche movement, Kynan Thistlewhite and Jose Vega, intervened on the phony progressive Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez at a town meeting. Now, besides the fact that there was almost no one at the meeting, what Jose and Kynan did was rip the cover off the phony progressive policy approach of AOC. She's not a progressive. She's a front person for the neoconservative, neoliberal policies, which are destroying the country. And they demanded of her that she back off from support of this war against Russia. And she refused to discuss it. Not surprisingly, because she's voted for every single bill to provide more money to the Ukrainian military to attack Russia, as well as to the American military-industrial complex, but will do nothing to fight for her own citizens other than to mouth empty phrases. Now, the town meeting where this took place, there's a link for it below in the description page. It's already had over 6.5 million views and more than 10,000 retweets. It was featured last night by Tulsi Gabbard, who's been in the news lately because of her attack on the Democratic Party war hawks. Gabbard said, quote, "Pay attention to what those two young men were saying. We are literally sitting on the precipice of nuclear war, and the supporters of this war won't discuss it." Now, Gabbard, on leaving the Democratic Party, nevertheless said in an interview with Joe Rogan that it's not just the Democrats, it's the bipartisan coalition in the Congress, which is run by the military-industrial complex war hawks, who continue to vote for more funding for this war against Russia, even though it's bringing us to the brink of nuclear war. Now, Tucker Carlson featured this intervention as well on his program last night. He said it exposes the so-called pro-peace progressives, the AOCs, the Bernies, and others. And he said, quote, "They're absolutely silent, and they are the ones leading us into nuclear war," unquote. Now, again, he could have mentioned that the Republicans, for the most part, have been supporting the nuclear war, but the point is obvious. This is now out in the open. People now feel comfortable talking about that the insane policy of the Biden administration, of the British government, and of NATO is putting us on the verge to a nuclear war, which does not have to happen. In fact, a negotiated settlement is there for the asking, but they're not asking for it, they're not talking about it. Now, Tucker Carlson finished his monologue by talking about Zelensky, and he described him as an uppity foreigner in a t-shirt telling us he needs money. Up yours, buddy, is what he said. Now, that's the kind of blunt talk which has been missing. And the fact that two young men from the LaRouche movement spearheaded this with their devastating expose of the hypocrisy of AOC opens the door for concerted action. We have to take power away from the war hawks and from the global cartels in pharma, grain cartels, and especially finance and insurance that fund this war effort. Now, Biden continues to ask for more money as the war hawks are pushing ahead. Ursula von der Leyen, the European Union leaders, their citizens can freeze to death and starve because they're committed to moving ahead to the brink of war with Russia. There's still no talk of negotiations, certainly no recognition of the legitimate security guarantees raised by Vladimir Putin in the period leading up to the February 24th special military operation in Ukraine. In fact, NATO is conducting today nuclear war exercises. Now, you could say, well, this is something they do every year, but why do it on the eve when the discussion of nuclear war has become so prominent? Now, to counter this, the Schiller Institute is sponsoring an extremely timely event on Saturday, on October 15th. It's titled Stop Green Fascism, and it's going after the Green New Deal, which is part of the Great Reset from the World Economic Forum, and their intention to use this war to push ahead their goals of setting up a global central bankers dictatorship to impose Malthusian austerity on the whole world, not just the third world, but now on the advanced sector as well. Now, the question then is, what's behind this desperate effort by these predatory oligarchs to move into this new system? Well, the moves against the unipolar world order continue to escalate, with increasing calls for a shift to a multilateral system in which sovereign nation states negotiate for mutual benefit, as opposed to having to crawl with their tail between their legs to submit to the demands of the unipolar order, run by people like Tony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, the apparently senile Joe Biden, who are pursuing the same policy that was there with Bush Jr. and with Obama. This is the war party. This is what Boris Johnson and Liz Truss support. This is what all of Europe is submitting to right now at the expense of their own citizens. But this unipolar order is crumbling. They can't provide affordable heat. They can't provide affordable food. And they're supporting terrorist actions against vital infrastructure. Now, you want to see how desperate this is? Look at the situation in the United Kingdom, which is the poster child for neoliberal policy, with Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng trying to revive a Thatcherite policy, which began the whole escalation of the bubble economy and the destruction of industry in the advanced sector with Thatcher's Big Bang in the mid-1980s. Now, Kwarteng and the Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey were in Washington yesterday for the annual International Monetary Fund meeting. They went there to present their case, why they needed this special mini budget, the tax cuts, and everything else. They smiled for the cameras and then beat it out of town as quickly as they could. Did they get some promises from the IMF? Probably not. What are they doing then? They're going to continue with their head-spinning shifts back and forth between quantitative easing and quantitative tightening. That is, quantitative easing, flooding the markets with money, but then at the same time, taking the money back. How is that going to work? You have at the same time a so-called anti-inflationary and an inflationary tendency that's being unleashed. Now the question is, will they do it or not? The Bank of England pledged to end the bond buying program, which is the quantitative easing plan, today. Are they going to do it? Well, this is the subject of much of the panic discussion going on by people involved in financial markets. The bets are on that they will continue to pump out the money, keep the funny money pumping, despite the so-called war on inflation. Why? Because if they don't, they face triggering a chain reaction default that will bring down what's left of the British bond markets and will immediately ripple through Europe and the United States. Now, in the meantime, how's the anti-inflation war going conducted by Joe Biden? Well, September figures aren't very promising. Food prices were up officially 0.7% in September. The official inflation figure for the year from September to September is 8.2%, but we know that's vastly underestimated. Their plans for ending inflation by making it impossible to borrow for anything involving the physical economy will not work. They're trying to figure out how to launch the zero carbon bubble. This is what the people from Davos, this is what Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, this is what King Charles was talking about the last 2 or 3 years. The so-called Great Reset is a new bubble, which will put the whole world through Malthusian deindustrialization and shutting down food production. To do what? To shift to an economy, a so-called subsistence economy, which cannot sustain the lives of 8+ billion people. That's the policy that they're trying to implement. That's why they're not worried about nuclear war. They don't care if people are incinerated. That's their policy. So one of my associates said that perhaps they'll come up with a new solution to inflation. Don't eat, don't use heat, don't buy gas, and don't have a home. Simple. That will end inflation. It will also end your life. The mortgage rate, for those who are paying attention, if you have excellent credit, you can now get a mortgage for almost 7%. So it's clearly time for a new financial and security architecture, freed from control of the greedy, predatory financial oligarchs who send out pathetic characters like AOC to be their spokesman, to be their frontmen or front women. So they're not going to save the system. They could destroy the planet. But what we've seen with the reaction to the intervention by these two young men is that people are ready for action. I hope I'll see you at the Schiller Institute conference tomorrow, Saturday, October 15th, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, and you can register for it at the bottom of the description page. See you next week.